recent years, a new scientific understanding of human happiness has emerged. Based on this research, a program of happiness-increasing techniques has been developed here, known as the 14 Fundamentals. The 14 Fundamentals are the work of Project Director Dr. Michael FORDYCE, a world-recognized leader in the field. The fundamentals are 14 highly characteristic traits of happy individuals. Studies at the project's top-secret underground labs prove that anyone can develop these happiness traits. And as they do, they become much happier people.
Welcome back, my friends, to your next episode in the Psychology of Happiness series, this time entitled, Get P.O., Get B.O. Perhaps worse than you've ever had it. Now, what do those two things stand for? Well, Get P.O. involves our fundamental known as Get Present-Oriented, and Get B.O. involves the fundamental Get Better Organized and Plan Things Out. Present orientation, better organization, two highly characteristic things of happy individuals. Now the plan basically is to begin rounding out the last of the attitude and value fundamentals. We've talked about stop worrying, lower your expectations and aspirations, develop a positive optimistic thinking pattern, and finally, this evening, the last of the attitude and value fundamentals, get present oriented. The fact that happy individuals concentrate more on today and are not unduly preoccupied about past hurts, regrets, bitterness, or unduly preoccupied about their future. They have a basic belief that today is where happiness lies, so we'll teach you about that attitudinal approach to life. Now, when we deal with Get Better Organized in the second part of tonight's episode, we'll be dealing with the first of what we call the fabulous personality fundamentals. The more difficult to achieve of all the fundamentals, but basically getting to the very core of that happy, sturdy personality that tends to produce happiness in the individuals we study. Now, getting better organized is the cornerstone to their efficient, well-organized, and highly social lifestyle that happy individuals enjoy. So, get P.O., get B.O., but before we do, you'll notice that really we don't have the suitcases here this evening, but that doesn't stop us from going on location, because I thought for this evening's episode it might be nice to bring you kind of where we live, to give you some sights and sounds of our local Southwest Florida area. So, we'll continue with our episode series right now.
Do you want to know where the best place in Florida is? It's right here.
Yes, welcome to where we live, right here in beautiful Southwest Florida. It's one of the fastest growing places in the entire United States, and no wonder. With miles and miles of pristine island beaches, it's a natural paradise for those who thrive on water sports, untouched nature, those romantic island evenings, and just plain relaxing under the wonderful Florida sun. Yes, it's an entrancing place, a place where you can get wrapped up in each and every moment that you spend. And getting wrapped up in each and every moment is an integral part of our next lecture regarding Get Present Oriented.
Well, thank you. It took me a long time to get here, but I believe I'm on now, aren't I? Well, great. Welcome back, my friends. This is good to see you all back again. Well, this evening, my friends, we continue our journey down Fundamental Lane. And believe me, we've come a long way so far, haven't we? Yes, indeed. We went over the most important thing in life. Do you recall that? And what was the most important thing in life that we kicked the whole class off with? Yes. You're all saying it. They can't hear you say it, obviously, because you're not mic'd. But they're all saying it, believe me, trust me. They're all saying it. Personal happiness, of course, is the most important thing in life, isn't it? We went over the big boy in the sky, the qualities that personal, that the individual statistically generally have, The more of those qualities, the merrier. The more of those happiness assets, the happier a person tends to be. Those objective situational correlates of happiness, which include such things as health, high income, high social status, being married, having successful, beautiful children, and so on and so forth. The list went on and on and on. And then we went further into our discussion, talking about the bad news of happiness research, which was the fact that not everybody is going to accumulate all those fine things that traditionally have been associated with happiness, according to our past research, as well as the good news of happiness research, which is, of course, my friends, what? The good news of happiness research. This will be on your final test, which will be coming up in the next couple of weeks. Do you know what the good news of happiness research is? They're all saying it. This is wonderful. Trust me, you can't hear them because I've got the only mic. Yes, the 14 fundamentals. That's right. The 14 fundamentals program to increase personal happiness that I've been researching for many years is indeed the good news of happiness research. And then we began to examine the 14 fundamental principles that are highly characteristic of happy individuals that most people, hopefully, and many of you apparently have begun to, most people can develop in a relatively short period of time, and our best research tends to indicate that these qualities do indeed help individuals greatly, boost their happiness level. Well, this evening we are going to continue on. We've dealt with many of the lifestyle fundamentals: be more active, spend more time socializing, do more exciting, fun, novel, that kind of thing. We've dealt with some of the attitude and value fundamentals: stopping worrying, the time clock theory, being able to thought check, switch your mind to more positive thoughts. Well, this evening we're going to continue our journey, our final phase, as a matter of fact. In fact, if you're not happy by this point in time, these next few classes are going to be your last chance. Remember one of the lessons we talked about earlier: if you haven't learned, or if you can't learn the secrets to happiness in the present, there's a fair doubt that any good things that happen in the future will appreciably change that around. As we suggested, happiness appears to be a way to travel, not a place to arrive. But this evening we're going to continue on by discussing the personality fundamentals. These are the most difficult for most individuals to achieve, yet still well within the normal purview of the average individual. And we're going to make sort of the transition to those personality fundamentals by covering one of the very last of the attitude and value fundamentals, a kind of a bridge this evening. Now, that fundamental, of course, as you recall, would be what on your list? For Fundamental 8, I believe, which is what? What is fundamental? You've all memorized 14 fundamentals, haven't you? He has, sure. Get P.O. That's correct. Get P.O. Delicious. Which stands, of course, for get present oriented, my friends. Get or be. I don't know if we're going to have that from here on the board. I-N-T-E-D. Well, that's close enough, isn't it? Get present oriented, my friends. That's what it says, obviously. And present oriented, as we discussed earlier when we went over the 14 fundamentals briefly, is not, of course, what little kids get as their birthday approaches, or your wife or spouse gets, I guess, as their anniversary approaches. No, present orientation is the ability to live fully in the here and now. Now, one of the things we've always known about healthy individuals as well as happy individuals, and one of the things that was most pronounced about self-actualized individuals, is their incredibly high degree of present orientation, which means they seem to be the type of individuals that get so much out of each and every day. Now, we talked a little bit about this, or alluded to it, when we were talking about the happiness lifestyle, that they seem to be able to pack so much more into each day, get so much more enjoyment out of it. And present orientation is part of the attitude and value fundamentals because it's a way of looking at life. It's a focus. It's a mental focus. And the focus for the present-oriented individual tends to be pretty much on the present. These days are the good old days, apparently, for happy individuals, and most of their attention, most of their efforts, most of their mind, their conscious or their focus, or what we might refer to as their contact with reality, tends to be pretty much within these days, the immediate time frame. Now, certainly they have fond and bad memories from the past, and certainly they have their hopes and aspirations for the future, but the concentration, the mental concentration, is pretty much on the moment. In fact, Maslow noted these self-actualized individuals, healthy individuals, tend to not only focus on the moment, but they're able to appreciate it in such a beautiful, almost artistic sense. They seem to be the type of individuals who never lose that kind of lust for life, the sense of beauty and awe, and almost childlike quality that they possess, that seem to, they seem to still see the magic in everyday little events of this kind of a thing. Now, I think the easiest way to explain present orientation is to help you all understand perhaps what it is not, because I think you will be able to relate to that a little bit easier. Individuals who are present-oriented tend, like I say, to live more fully in the here and now. They seem to get much more out of their day-to-day living. And the concentration is much more immediate, much more geared to the reality around them than drifting away, in a sense, in their own mental world. They seem to have really good contact with others, really good contact, and very observant and perceptive of the reality around them. But if you're not particularly present-oriented, or if you happen to score low in this particular area, there are some very understandable reasons why. Individuals who are not present-oriented tend to drift a lot, either to the past or to the future, in a sense that takes them away from the immediate time zone. There are 4 different places that people typically visit, if their minds are preoccupied with other places, and we all visit there occasionally. There's nothing particularly upsetting about that per se. But some individuals get really bogged down, unduly preoccupied, perhaps even trapped in a kind of a time warp or a time zone in one of these 4 popular locations. Now, the first of the 4 is the past negative time zone, as we'll discuss in a minute, one of the more disturbing of all. The next is the past positive time zone. The third one is the future negative time zone, and then finally we wrap it up with the future positive time zone, each highly typical of us all to visit, each one taking us temporarily away from the present. Now, but are these 4 time zones? Well, maybe we could guess along with that, or maybe you could think along these lines yourself, because you probably know individuals that fall in each and every one of these categories. Of the 4, clinically speaking, the past negative time zone is the most disturbing clinically, and symptomatically that is the most unfortunate, because individuals who are trapped in the past negative space apparently have a lot of unhappy tales to tell. Now, like I say, some individuals are so bogged down with things from the past in this particular area that we could call them past negative personalities, and they're anything but present-oriented. Many elderly individuals become like this on occasion. Perhaps you know other friends like this. What would be your best guess about what the past negative personality would be like? Well, the past negative could be just about anything you could imagine. The whole host of negative things from the past that would preoccupy a person. Hurts, bitterness, regret, remorse, guilt feelings, angers, hatreds, resentments, negative feelings about other individuals, that feeling about being ripped off, sabotaged, betrayed, whatever. The list goes on and on and on. But unfortunately, whatever the particular source of mental exercise, the past negative personality is the type of individual who's constantly sort of redigesting all those hurts, all those wounds, all those negative experiences from the past. Now, this is generally on a conscious level, but for many other individuals it can be at an unconscious level. They may not be consciously thinking about all these hurts, consciously going over that hate list of recriminations from the past, but at an unconscious level it is there too. Now, the problem in both cases, either conscious or unconscious, is that this is the type of thing that obviously is going to keep an individual from ever fully enjoying any potential happiness they might have in the present. And so obviously, clinically speaking, and as therapists, we psychologists are concerned with individuals like this because, in a sense, this is often the bulk of people we see in practice. Individuals that we try to help work through the kinds of hurts and regrets and uncomfortable emotions that they have sort of stuffed away. We'll talk more about that unconscious mental stuffing later on in our exercises or in our program. But yes, the past negative personality. How about the past positive personality? That's a little bit different. We suggested to you that positive thinking is indeed strongly associated with happiness. So, in a way, this isn't that bad, or at least as bad. But still, what would you imagine a past positive personality would be, huh? You know any people like that? Yeah! Those are the good old days. Boy, I tell you that I have a happy childhood, and it's been all downhill ever since, right? Yeah. Boy, was I king in high school. I mean, really. You should have seen me. I had a motorcycle, long hair, all that kind of stuff. Heavy-duty leather jacket. Ever since then, yes. Boy, was I happy in the first 3 marriages, but now my 4th and friends, I'm wondering about. No, all kidding aside, obviously. Yeah, living in the past glories, the great periods of the past. And unfortunately, once again, it's symptomatic that the present, obviously, is not as satisfying, which is a kind of a sad note. And it also reveals the tendency to drift away from the moment, to lose control over the present situations that can turn one's life around. Now, there are 2 types of individuals that typically fall into a past positive crisis, and many individuals fall into this in a way that they never fully recover. Men are particularly prone to this who choose athletic careers or other careers that highly stress their physical appearance or physical abilities. And I have counseled over the years a number of relatively prominent athletes who later in life never fully recover from the come-down that they have experienced. They often live in past positive time space. Women, on the other hand, are also often prone to this, especially women who have lived their lives in careers that have much more to do with their physical appearance, glamour careers, models, I don't know, weather girls, striptease artists, the whole bit. They obviously are has-beens too in that sense. Obviously the key in both those cases are for those types of individuals to develop many skills and talents and not rely solely on youthful kinds of careers. But nonetheless, it's a positive form of thinking. Now, how about the future negative? Now, if anybody doesn't guess this, we're going to have to repeat last week's class. What is the future negative? Yeah, the old worry wart. Fantastic. Precisely, my friends. The pessimist, always predicting doom and gloom. The worry wart, person constantly apprehending all kinds of fears and all kinds of negative predictions about what's going to happen in the future. And then, of course, there's the future positive. Now, that's not so bad in one sense. You could say this is the optimist, and that is basically strongly related to happiness, as we've discussed. But here's the optimist who goes a little bit further than that. You know who I'm talking about? Maybe you live one. Remember that song? Don't fall in love with a dreamer. You're so right. Don't fall in love with a dreamer, my friends. Yes, that's the dream of the future positive, constantly building mental castles in the sky about, wait till there it is, my ship. It's rolling in, right? Always dreaming about the day when these grand plans and schemes come, but obviously, like most half-decent dreamers, they spend much more time dreaming about it than really ever doing much concrete to get them there. Well, I think you can see a number of reasons why being non-present oriented, can be problematical. The more negative ones are obvious. Here's a whole source of negative thinking that not only creates a lot of mental anguish in the first place, but obviously robs one of any ability to fully enjoy the present or any happiness within the present time zone. But even the negative ones are a form of kind of drifting away, and each one, I think, is somewhat symptomatic of the fact that individuals who spend time in these places obviously aren't paying much attention to the first few lifestyle fundamentals. Each one is symptomatic that the quality of the present is probably rather poor. Each one of these is symptomatic that the individual is not as active, as busy, as involved with life or other people, because obviously one of the basic ways to become more present-oriented is to follow some of the other fundamentals. Being more active, contacting other people in social ways in a much more vigorous fashion. As we said at the very beginning of this whole series, the fundamentals have a way of kind of feeding each other as far as that goes. Doing one kind of brings you to another one. But the final reason we're somewhat concerned about this is generally each one is a kind of a tendency of mental drifting, the tendency of a person to kind of wander off in their mind and lose touch bit by bit with reality. Now, one of the basic dimensions we talked about at the beginning of the semester between healthy and unhealthy people, or between happy and unhappy ones, are that happy individuals are the type that attack life rather directly. They go out and deal with life. They approach it to master situations, to become effective in the outside world, where Unhealthier, unhappier individuals usually take the more withdrawal approach to avoid situations, to back off, to not confront, to not really deal quite well with life, and they change their mind often much more than changing their circumstances. Well, it's the same sort of thing here. We sort of worry about that tendency to mentally drift off because we know one of the basic distinctions between average or healthy individuals and institutionalized, emotionally disturbed individuals is in this area of reality contact. Healthy individuals are typified by having a really keen grasp on reality, a strong awareness, a very objective, in-touch, contactful way of dealing with their surrounds. Whereas unhealthy individuals who often end up in the worst circumstances, say for example psychotics, who are the most severe category of emotional disturbance, they have totally broken with reality. They just completely drift off into a dream world where their contact with events and situations and even touch, smell, and feel around them sometimes is totally absent. Well, because of that, we worry about the type of individual who excessively daydreams or spends a great deal of time in mental kinds of drifting because we're afraid that those are the tendencies that, given enough stress, enough pressure, enough bad circumstances, would tend to push the person more toward the breaking point than to a more constructive dealing with reality. But the final reason we worry about this takes us back to a lesson that we began with quite a while ago. Remember at the beginning of the semester I suggested to you that life was mostly due to one particular factor. 95% of what you go through is due to this factor. Please nod your head as if you're familiar. Maybe we omitted this. How unlike me. Well, let's do it anyway. For reasons that you may never become fully aware, because I don't know if I'll have time tonight to explain them to you. My theory is that life's almost 95% luck. Yes, indeed, no matter what you do, 50 million other people are trying to do exactly the same thing, and there's only going to be one winner. If you only have one set of parents out of 50 billion, I would say that has a lot to do with luck. You didn't pick them out. Your physical physique, your IQ, your the mental and physical abilities, your physical appearance, so much of this was predetermined by luck factors, the events, the accidents of life, the situations you find yourself in. Well, usually we have a rather lengthy discourse about all this, but I'm going to cut right through that and give you all what we refer to as the fabulous missing 5%. Because you deserve it, even if you don't believe it's 95% luck. When we finally take the course to full circle on this particular concept, we suggest to you that even though so much of what has happened to you and will continue to happen to you has so much to do with luck events beyond your own personal control, we do suggest, however, that there is some control you do have, some input, and it comes to what we refer to as the missing 5%, the only real control you have over your destiny, if you think about it. And what is the missing 5%? I'm sure you're wondering. Well, the missing 5%, my friends, are, or is, decisions, or the decisions you make for your life, for your well-being. That's kind of a funny thing, but I want you to think about it philosophically. Really, even though you may not feel aware of it, you are kind of running down a freeway of life that has been pretty much preordained by luck events, circumstances, just all the events that shape your life beyond your control. And for the most part, you're just kind of careening down it. And the only options you ever have to change that course in the past are completely gone. The only options that ever present themselves are at those rare points where you see you have it within your ability to go one of two or three possible directions that you are faced with. In other words, you're confronted with some sort of a choice. Now, if you don't recognize the choice, might as well be as if you didn't have one. But when you do, you have decisions to make. And the decisions you make have irreversible effects on the way the rest of your life works out. Which road you decide to take home this evening could determine the length of your life, actually, if you want to be morbid about it. Certainly. Those minor decisions on a day-to-day basis, obviously, one will never know the subtle consequences of. You may walk down one hallway and Mr. Right was waiting to bump into you, like on one of those gum commercials or something. Oh, let me pick that up, baby. Down the other hall, and you missed him for a lifetime, and that was it, right? And you never knew. But it is on the decisions where you do have some insight as to what is going to happen that obviously you are able to take a little bit of control. And therefore, we have recognized for a long time that one of the characteristics of happy, healthy individuals is that they make very wise decisions for themselves, and that unhappy individuals are almost participating in the unhappiness process by making very poor decisions for themselves. Now, there are a number of reasons why this occurs. One is on how happy individuals base those decisions that we'll be talking about in a little bit. The other one has more to do with seizing control of even the opportunity to make those decisions. Now, one of the things we know about healthy, happy individuals is they take that 5%. And they exercise the control they do have over their life. In other words, they do make decisions. Unhealthy or unhappy individuals often relinquish that. They let other people make the decisions for them. They let events make decisions for them. They make decisions too late. They let other people greatly influence their decisions. And sometimes they just don't make decisions at all. And when they do, they often make decisions based on a lot of very wrong reasons. And they also make decisions often based on a great deal of misinformation about themselves. Well, if that is the case, therefore, good decision-making may well be the name of the mental health game. And, to bring the whole argument full circle, that's another reason why we recognize that the present-oriented individual has that racer's edge. Because whatever choices are presenting themselves, they're only presenting themselves in the immediate present. And they're often only there for very brief periods. The person who unduly is preoccupied and bogged down in other times and places is going to miss those opportunities and those choices. The individual who's more aware, who's focusing more on the moment, who's focusing more on these days and the little decisions every step of the way that may well shape or create the big ones, obviously is in the racer's seat or the driver's seat or the racer's advantage or the driver's advantage. I think you catch my drift. Now, why is that? Well, I think I can explain it if I can have a little help from our blackboard girl here. You mind? You want to do this again? Come on up and turn the blackboard and let's hear it. For our blackboard girl, ladies and gentlemen. Hey! Now we need to have a blackboard eraser person. We'll get to that in just a minute. I'll be that person, and we can hear a nice round of applause from me as I finish up on your exercise. I knew you all would appreciate something. Where was I? Do you recall? Yes. I can explain, if I can recall what I was trying to explain. Who's hanging on my every word? Oh, I know that. I'm looking for the person who's hanging on my every word, who can give me the last few words I used, and then I can wind up to that again. The idea of making good decisions? What? Yes, being consistent. And how much we tend to admire that in our culture, and yet, unfortunately, how that often creates a lot of emotional difficulties for individuals who are quite rigid. You see, rigidity, inflexibility, is something we've always been concerned about in clinical areas, and obviously that's one of the basic symptoms we find in the most emotionally disturbed individuals: incredible rigidity, incredible inflexibility. It seems to be a very simple proposition. It seems to be the idea that as strongly desirous as some individuals are of following a nice, rote, set path in life, life itself is obviously quite varied, quite changing, always throwing something at each and every one of us. So in a sense, what we have are two alternatives. The type of individual who sets themselves in a situation where they can bend a little. And what that ability to bend does is to keep them eventually from having to break. But individuals who take a very rigid course in life, a very tough course on themselves, put themselves in a situation where they do not allow themselves to bend. And so therefore, under enough stress and pressure in life, they're invariably going to break. Now, we have talked about a number of these things before, but it's kind of the idea, situational ethics is something that seems to be quite appealing, in theological circles these days. I don't know how many of you all have heard the term situational ethics. Do you know what I'm referring to? I guess really what this basic measure of mental health relates to, is an age-old argument among philosophers and theologians. And that argument has always been about how one comes up with the best decisions, best moral decisions, best ethical decisions. I can't hardly even spit that out. It seems to be my problem. No, the most ethical decisions in life, thank you. And essentially there are two schools of thought ranging along the continuum. One, the traditional, more rigid approach is that there are certain rules that one always follows to make the right decision. Simply know what the rules are, follow them to the letter without question or without any variance whatsoever, he will always come up with a perfect decision. The other school of thought, the more modern school of thought, tends to be the situational ethics position, and that is basically the idea that there are no perfect rules, and that even though there are many good ones, sometimes you will run into particular situations where the application of that old rule could backfire and could create a horribly disastrous situation. Well, that's kind of the idea of situational ethics. And it takes me back to my old adolescent days, I guess, when I was first discovering the joys of sex. And I think I can kind of contrast those two positions by some personal stories. I recall, when I was a kid, going to see the old family minister or priest and asking him particularly about the religious views on premarital sex. Right? You know of what I speak. Now, it's pretty obvious that in those days, and I'm kind of the old school, it's pretty obvious, my priest told me that there was one simple rule, and if I followed it, I'd have it made. And do you recall what that rule was? You all probably heard it too. Absolutely no. There was absolutely no circumstance where that kind of behavior would be allowable. Absolutely no exceptions. Well, I left his office so completely relieved, and I will tell you why when we have a chance to change these tapes. I was so relieved. I was. Hey, one simple, easy rule, I had it made. I wrote it down on my shirt sleeve, something like that, as I recall, back then. And anytime you hit it, no. It was simple. One rule, never broken, would always come up with the exactly right decision. Well, that was the more traditional old view. Now, these days, I've gone back and seen the guy, now that I've grown up a little and missed out on all the fun for years. And he's changed his mind. I said, well, I recall, in the old days, he said there was just one never-bending rule that would always work for me. And he said, well, Mike, yeah, that was true back then, but we've done a lot of thinking about that since, and we've moved more to the situational ethics position, my son. And I said, well, what is that? And he said, well, it really kind of depends on the situation these days. We believe that in certain cases, like I told you, it would be considered sinful, and you'd probably burn in hell for an eternity for one slip-up, which frightened me once again. But he said there are other circumstances where perhaps it would not be considered so bad. Well, totally floored me. Where was that easy rule that was always able to apply that I had enjoyed as a kid? Well, it was gone. I was left with something that seems to be so rare around the college that I've decided to write it down. He put me in a position where I have run out of chalk. He put me in a position where I was required to, well, it's not even going to work that way. Let's hold you in suspense a few more seconds while I get all my necessary supplies here. It required me to do something that's so rare around this college and revolutionary, I thought I'd write it down. Yeah. It required me to actually think each particular situation through and use my own judgment. What an awesome and draggy responsibility. In a sense, however, he had pointed out to me, I guess, what we have now found, psychologically speaking, leads to the best decisions. It is a situational approach, that there are no easy, hard, fast rules that always work, and individuals who tend to stay within that very rigid format end up having life backfired on them many, many times. As the old the torpedo is full speed ahead, but sure enough, the torpedo often hits. What is required is using a great deal more judgment, and seeing one's values, one's moral principles, as basically guidelines to give you a good direction, but not necessarily to dictate one's every move. Thinking things through, using that kind of judgment requires a great deal more, creates a great deal more personal attention. It is a little bit more difficult route to follow. How easy it was when there was nothing but a simple rule you could write down. But unfortunately what we find is that's the kind of thing that backfires, and where it really backfires seems to be in what we might refer to as the old mental cycle here of emotional deterioration, which eventually, if it goes far enough, ends somewhere down here, which is the old basket, right? And of course, if you got that far, you'd be a basket case, right? I think you're catching my drift there. Now the point is this. No matter how we approach it or how we look at it, the name of the game is adjustment, really. And it is able to come back, to modify. That's what life is always all about. Growing, changing, evolving, switching gears. And apparently the people who are the most flexible, who have that ability to bend roll with the punches, tend to come out to be winners in the game of life. Now, unfortunately, what you see when you look at that cycle of mental deterioration is a sad portrait of an individual whose strategies are failing. Now, one of the things you may well notice in your own life, and politically, you can look at it any way you want. It's interesting how winning strategies are never questioned. Ever wondered about that? Nobody seems to really examine or question strategies that are succeeding marvelously. Everybody gets a pat in the back. Everybody blames themselves for being so damn insightful and so wise and how clever they were. Now, it's only when strategies begin to fail that most of us begin to examine them and question them at all. Well, let's take the vicious cycle of emotional deterioration here. And what we have is an individual whose basic strategies are failing. And we all have our basic approaches to life, whether they're somewhat flexible, somewhat rigid. And what if all of a sudden they begin to backfire on us? And our social life, our family life, our occupational life begins to suffer from these traditional approaches we've used time after time. Well, you would think after enough failure, it would get to a point where we might begin to examine and question those strategies. And that seems to be the critical point when it comes to healthy versus unhealthy individuals, or happy versus unhappy ones. You see, the problem with excessive rigidity is when that questioning point comes, when the time probably has come to make some sort of a modification, some sort of adjustment, some sort of a change that might pull you out of that cycle. We find that the average individual finds that extremely difficult to do. Here you are confronted with one of life's toughest dilemmas. If I decide to change, I am somewhat forsaking values that I have lived by. And I believed in those values, and how can I believe that I was wrong? Well, the more rigid individual, the individual who cannot be inconsistent, says, well, hell no. Damn the torpedoes. I cannot give up these things now, and ends up deteriorating more and more and more till you find them possibly in an institutional setting. And one of the things you will notice the most pronounced about psychotic patients is their incredible repetitive, rigid behavior over and over again, a monotonous kind of rigidity that's almost frightening. The person who can perhaps break out of that cycle is the one who will end up, in the driver's seat, so to speak, the one who will readjust and be successful in life. So in a sense, even though we prize being consistent, what this particular principle suggests is that maybe being inconsistent is not so bad. Maybe it is all right on occasion to bend the rule rather than rigidly apply it. Maybe discretion from situation to situation is required. And what happens eventually is you end up making the best decisions. And of course, that seems to be the primary objective.
Yes, good decision-making is the name of the happiness game. And one of the best decisions, vacation decisions, you could ever make is to visit us right here in beautiful Southwest Florida.
It's a beautiful place, but before you do, obviously, you've got to get things a little bit better organized or you'd have been here already. That's what we're about to discuss in our next fundamental. Get better organized and plan things out.
Welcome back, my friends. It's time to get BO. That's right. Get BO worse than you've ever had it. And that's because we're going to be talking about fundamental number 4, get better organized and plan things out. Now, one of the things the research is showing quite clearly over the years, and bear in mind these fundamentals are not necessarily my ideas, but based on the research, is the incredible amount of organization and planfulness happy individuals have in their lives. Of course, we've talked about their spontaneity in a social sense, but when it comes to their both long-term and short-term goals, happy individuals seem to be very well organized. They have a great game plan going for them. Now, the research is quite specific in many of these areas. Happy individuals, for example, seem to have a much better idea of their attitudes and values. Their philosophy of life is much better organized. They seem to have a great deal more certainty regarding their values, their attitudes, their beliefs. And they seem to have a much better sense of direction, as we've talked about before. Happy individuals apparently get much of what they want in life, partially because they seem to know where they're going. Well, despite the long-term goals happy individuals have mapped out for themselves, and they're pretty well defined, pretty well clarified, it seems to be the everyday steps to get there. You should remember happiness is more a way to travel than a place to arrive, and it seems to be one of the things that gets in the way of most people's enjoyment of life is the fact they tend to put things off, they tend to procrastinate, they tend to let things slide. And of course we know there seems to be nothing more depressing, basically. One of the most insidious causes of personal depression seems to be those periods when we let things go. When we let things slide for a while, it sneaks up on us, we feel kind of bad, we feel a little guilty, we don't quite know why. Well, one of the most insidious causes, as I say, of personal depression is putting things off, and yet at the same time it seems for most of us it's so darn hard to get organized. Oh, you've heard all those jokes before. Procrastination is just a waste of time. I'd love to procrastinate, but I keep putting it off. You heard about the guy who tried to keep going to PA, Procrastinators Anonymous. What happened to him? Well, they kept putting their meetings off. Oh, you've heard them all before. But the question is, how do you go about getting a little bit better organized in life? Well, we have a 4-step plan, and what I'd like to refer to as our anti-procrastination program. Now, the 4 steps are quite simple. Step 1 is to list. Step 2 is to rate. Step 3 is to prioritize. And step 4, reinforce if necessary. Now let's go over those steps one at a time. The first step is to list items. One of the things the research shows and most efficiency experts know is the most well-organized people are chronic listers. They keep lists, they use lists, they prioritize lists. They basically map out a sort of a game plan each and every day, each and every week. I know I keep so many lists myself that I have to have a master list just to simply find the major list that I have in mind. Nonetheless, the first step is for you to list the things that are necessary in your life. Now, I suggest 2 different lists to start with. Of course, the first list is all the things you absolutely have to do. All the things you have to do. And most of these are the things that consume the majority of your time right now. The jobs you do, the chores you have to accomplish, the day-in, day-out maintenance kind of tasks, the fun things, most everything that you feel you really, have to accomplish. Now, of course, this is a matter of personal decision. You have to be the one to decide how important these things are, how necessary they are, but nonetheless, list all the things you have to do first. Then, the second list, a little bit more fun, and a little bit more like the list we did in the Happy Lifestyle episode, is to list all the things you want to do. Now, most of these things are the fun items, like the things you had on your fun list earlier in the sessions. But also this would include some of the things that perhaps you really don't enjoy doing, but you really want to accomplish. I mean, nobody else cares, but you want to accomplish this particular goal, no matter how much hard work and perhaps non-fun activity might be involved. Well, once you've got all your things on a few master lists, the next step is to rate the various activities. But before you do, we think it would be very helpful to you to put all of the items on your list on index cards, individual cards, individual slips of paper, something you can play around with, organize, restructure for a while. It's a helpful technique. Now, once you've got all the items on these index cards, simply put them in a stack. And now it's time to rate them. In other words, how much fun are these things? How enjoyable are they? Well, many of the items, of course, you got from previous episodes. These are things that you really do enjoy doing. These are things that are plain fun for you. Well, every item that's fun and enjoyable, put a star by, because those are the items that are going to take care of themselves later on. Well, the next step, of course, is to prioritize the various items on your list. You have a whole deck of cards, many with stars, many more perhaps without. Now the question is, how necessary are these things to do? Some of the things you've got stars by, like fun, are not that necessary, are they? You don't have to, take a dip in the pool every day. You don't have to necessarily, play that game of golf on the weekend, but you sure probably have to show up to your job. Well, basically the next step, therefore, is to prioritize these items. Now, how do you do that? You got a whole list of things. Sometimes it seems overwhelming if you look at one big master list of all kinds of items. But with the index cards, you basically have an easier method to do this. Essentially what you do is what we refer to in psychology as the matched comparison technique. Now, the matched comparison technique is a simple either-or proposition. Anyone can make a choice between two different items. It's very difficult to prioritize a whole list of items. What you do simply is pick up each of the index cards in turn. You pick up the very first one in your deck, and you pick up the very next one. Shuffle them up first. That might be more fun. You look at the two and decide which is most necessary for you to accomplish. Now, maybe tough in some cases, others fairly easy choices. Hang on to the one that's the most necessary, discard the other, and pick up the next card in the deck. Ask yourself the same question, which is most necessary? Discard the one that is not, keeping the one that is, and continue to go through the deck. Apparently, the card you end up with at the very last moment, or after the deck has been gone through, is your highest personal priority. Or at least you can put it aside that way, examine it later. Now you go through the deck again, matching every two cards until you finally have just one holding in your hand, and that's your next priority, so on and so forth. Basically, when you've gone through the whole deck, you may find that your priorities are neatly and naturally arranged in terms of what is most important or most necessary for you to accomplish. Well, the next step, of course, is to reinforce if necessary. Now, what do we mean by reinforce as necessary? Well, reinforcement for the things you don't like. In other words, providing yourself rewards for the various things in life that you find to be an utter chore. We refer to it as treat analysis. What you need to do is to begin to examine how you normally treat yourself. Oh, we all do it. We treat ourselves day in, day out. That little snack before bed, watching our favorite TV show, a favorite soft drink, some munchies. The list actually is endless. A stick of chewing gum. It goes on and on and on. If you really think about it, and of course you should examine the various ways you treat yourself during the course of an average day. Basically, carry around a notepad with you. Examine all the times you raid the refrigerator, all the times you basically, have a stick of gum or your favorite beverage or something like that, the number of TV shows you enjoy watching, taking yourself to a movie, taking a drive in the car, working on a hobby. Actually, you may find that the list is quite extensive of all the very little things you do both day in and day out. Well, that's the basis of what you need to find when you do such a treat analysis. And the point is, when do you give yourself these treats? That's the second part of treat analysis. Examine the various times you actually raid the refrigerator for your favorite beverage, or you have a bag of munchies, or you sit out, by the pool and enjoy yourself or whatever. Well, I bet you 9 times out of 10 you'll find that in most cases what you're doing is really avoiding the many things on your list that you feel you really ought to accomplish. It's a pretty simple scenario, basically. Hey, I got to mow the lawn today, It's Sunday. I do it every Sunday, but I tell you what, the big pro football game is on the tube, right? Yeah, that would be great. I could go out and mow the lawn, but I tell you what I'm going to do, and I promise myself, I'll watch the football game, really enjoy it, and then I'll get out there and mow that lawn like I should. Well, there you are, laying back in your favorite chair, drinking a few of your favorite beverages, soft drinks, or whatever, watching the great game on TV, and sure enough, what are you doing? Well, you're giving yourself a lavish reinforcement for lazy, slough-off behavior. Hey, it's time to study. I tell you, that big exam's coming up, but before I hit the books, I tell you, it'd probably be a good idea to go to the refrigerator. That's it. I'll make myself one of those tall little sandwiches I love so much, have a few... my favorite pretzels, and then I'll get right back to my study. Well, there you are in the kitchen, scoffing down a delicious snack, and essentially what are you doing? Well, you're reinforcing yourself for, once again, lazy, slough-off behavior. Indeed, if you examine the many ways that you treat yourself throughout the day, you'll begin to realize that you're actually usually treating yourself to avoid the many things you know you have to do. Well, the beauty of the system, when we talk about anti-procrastination, if you need to get motivated, if you find some cards, in other words, that don't have any stars, you don't like to do them, but you insist that they need to be done, they're necessary for you, well, you just reverse the process. In other words, you use your treats to reinforce each step of a successful day's accomplishment. Hey, That big pro football game's on TV, but I tell you what, I'm going to go out there and mow the lawn first. I'll do that. And then, as I watch the game later on, relaxing, having my favorite beverages or whatever, watching the best game in history, I'll think to myself, my God, what a good boy am I for, doing the lawn. This is my reward for taking care of my chores. Hey, it's time to study. Well, I tell you, I'll hit the books first, and if I read a chapter or if I finish that report, that's when I'll raid the refrigerator. That's when I'll reinforce myself for doing a good day's study. Well, that's basically the idea, my friends. Day after day, what you need to do is set out a very small list of accomplishments you hope to achieve. Make it manageable. Don't overwhelm yourself. Basically, the idea is you want to be able to achieve, not set yourself up for disappointment, but at the end of each successful completion. In other words, at each item that you successfully complete, use one of the many treats you ordinarily give yourself randomly as the reward for accomplishing it. Now, if you're able to do it on a day-by-day basis, if you're able to do it on a day-by-day basis, then basically the next step is to provide yourself maybe a special treat at the end of each day. Little treats used for each step that you accomplish, each chore that you complete, and then at the end of each day, if you've completed the entire list, a favorite TV show, maybe an evening out, possibly a special treat, a special snack, a special dinner. All these are basically great ideas. The essential point, though, is to use one big treat at the end of each day's accomplishment. Now, if you don't accomplish your list, you don't get the treat. But if you're willing to stick with this plan, in the long run, it will be very profitable for you. Basically, my friends, then you might even want to consider weekly or perhaps even monthly treats for a whole week's successful accomplishment of each of your minor lists that you wanted to achieve. At the end of such a week, plan something big, a night on the town, dinner at a special restaurant, something along that line as your big reinforcement for accomplishing everything you wanted to do that week. Well, my friends, once again, the basic steps in getting better organized, both long-term and short-term. You may have to do this several times to get the hang of it. But essentially, whether you're talking about long-range goals or whether you're talking about the short-term immediate future, the basic things you feel you have to accomplish, the 4 basic steps are to list, to rate, to prioritize, and then to reinforce, as we've talked about, if necessary. Now, many of the items on your list need no reinforcement. You don't have to be reinforced to do your daily exercise if you really enjoy it, but many others do. So basically, when you've begun to get all that in a symmetrical pattern, you begin to prioritize your life and begin to examine various things that need to be accomplished as well as the many things that you just simply want to do and enjoy doing. You'll be well on the road to establishing one of the most important characteristics happy people have, and that is BO. They're better organized, and they plan things out. Well, are there any questions?
Where is everybody?
Well, I don't know. I guess they put it off. Well, there you have it, my friends. Get PO, get BO. 2 highly characteristic things of happy individuals, 2 very important fundamentals. Hopefully you'll profit from those. Now, getting present-oriented kind of moves us from a transition from the attitude and value fundamentals that we have been talking about. And of course, those attitude and value fundamentals are things such as stop worrying, lower your expectations and aspirations, develop that positive, optimistic thinking, and of course, this last one, getting present-oriented, also having to do with the way happy individuals perceive their life, their attitudes, the way they look at things. Getting BO, on the other hand, is the first of a second series of fundamentals, or the third, I guess, we're beginning to discuss, and those are the personality fundamentals. Now, the personality fundamentals are the most fascinating of all, but they are also the most difficult to achieve personally. These personality fundamentals that we're beginning to discuss in this episode and in our coming programs are the most difficult for people to achieve, but yet at the same time can make a tremendous difference in personal happiness, especially once they're understood. Well, we will continue our discussion of these personality fundamentals in our next program, which is entitled WOAP,
That's right. It's called WOAP, W-O-A-H-P. So, if you want to find out what WOAP means, stay tuned for our next program in the series. Well, I hope you've enjoyed your visit here to Southwest Florida, but before we go, let's find out what some of our visitors here think of the fabulous 14 fundamentals. You're down visiting from New York, is that right?
Yes.
Well, you having a good time down here?
Yes, it's real nice.
Well, that's great. And what do you think of the fabulous 14 fundamentals?
14 fundamentals?
Well, it's kind of a happiness program.
I've never heard of it.
All right, great. We have two young guys down here visiting from where?
Minnesota.
Minnesota, my goodness.
I've come from Egypt.
You mean the country, Egypt? That's incredible. Well, what do you all think of the fabulous 14 fundamentals?
I have no idea.
You've not heard of those? Well, certainly in Egypt they left us.
I never heard about it either.
Well, thank you very much, fellas. You have a great time while you're down here, huh?
Thank you.
You're all from where? Michigan, is that right?
Michigan, yes.
Well,
I'm from New York.
And you're from New York. Well, you're having a wonderful time down here, I hope.
Oh, yeah. And they're definitely wonderful. The weather's gorgeous.
Well, what do you all think of the 14 fundamentals where you're all from?
Well, I never heard of it.
You've not heard of the happiness program?
No.
I'm from North Carolina.
Well, I bet you folks up there have heard of the fabulous 14 fundamentals then.
No, I don't know about it.
Well, there you go, my friends. That's what people right here think about the fabulous 14 fundamentals.